Watercolor paintings are the most interesting and versatile media I know of. Of course, I'd say that. It adapts easily to classical or contemporary paintings, and you can paint brilliantly or very pastel. And you're constantly learning for information about it. In fact, if that's something you enjoy doing, you can do it for the rest of your life. It has wonderful qualities in the sense that the dry paper will help you hold the shapes. And while you're doing that, you can enjoy the interesting characteristics of the paint, like leaving color, laying color into one another, or mixing color into the paper, taking advantage of its exceptional transparencies, which create a glow over underpaintings. It's also less expensive than paints. They last longer. They're cleaner than other mediums. So like you could allow yourself to set up your studio in your kitchen on a Sunday morning. And it's so easily portable. This is all you need, just paper, pencil, paint, some water. And then the rest of the supplies just make it more fun. So let's talk about those supplies and see what you need. First, we'll start with paper. There are several things you can paint on when you're using watercolor. This is a crescent watercolor board. They call it cold press and 100% cotton, acid-free surface. There's an aqua board. This is a museum series panel, and it has a nice wood finish. This is totally different surface than paper, but at some point this might be interesting for you to try. And then just take a panel and gesso it, and that gives you an entirely different kind of surface too. We're going to concentrate on watercolor paper. There are three things you need to consider when buying paper. One of them is whether or not it's made from wood or cotton, and there are other materials used in making paper, but wood and cotton are the mainstays. The other thing is to think about is sizing. And what sizing does is sort of like a starch coating. And what it does is it controls the correct degree of absorbency. In other words, it lets the colors sit on the surface and reflect the maximum amount of light. If it's not sized, honestly, the paint just soaks into the paper in really weird ways. It's really nasty. It's not good. Anyway, the third one is if it's acid free, and that means if the pH balance is correct on the paper, because if it's not, it'll change the colors of the paint over time. So there you are, three things: whether or not it's wood, whether or not it has sizing, and whether or not it's acid free. Watercolor paper comes in all shapes and sizes, and I wanted to start with this one because this looks absolutely great. 140 pound or 300 GSM. Acid free, neutral pH, strong, rough surface, ideal for all, but nowhere does it say 100% cotton. So you can pretty much guess that this one is going to be made from wood. And that is okay, except that you have to understand that it's going to behave differently than the ones that are 100% cotton. And the reason that I recommend that you buy one kind of paper and stick with it is so that, because watercolor is so different on everything. And so if you learn how to use one kind of paper, then you have at least made your environment a little bit more controlled. Okay, mixed media paper. Why would you ever use this? I use it a lot to test colors. And I use it for acrylics and everything else, but for watercolor, and I don't know, for notes, but that's about it for that. The most expensive way to buy watercolor, arch, we call it arches in the United States, is with these pads that have the gum all the way around. In fact, there is a way that you can do that yourself. You can get some pads and do this. This is the most convenient way. I use it a lot if I'm on a boat or something, because then I don't have to stretch the paper. In order to get each one out, you just put a little knife inside here and you just run the knife all the way around, and each page comes off after you have painted on it. Arches always has a color coating, and you notice here 100% cotton. So that is the key right here for having the right kind of paper to work on your watercolors. Okay, so then it also comes in just a pad. This is less expensive than this, but if you're going to use a lot of water, you may end up stretching it. This is also hot press, they call it satin press. Again, also 100% cotton. The other way to buy paper is in these little books, and this is definitely not 100% cotton, but I love these, and I do use them for watercolor, for learning lessons, for testing things. And like if I get a video, I'll get one of these books and go through the video with one of these books. And it's not bad, but I do have to understand that once I start painting on 100% cotton, it's going to look a little bit different than this. The least expensive way to buy watercolor is in these packs of 5. Arches always color codes it, lets you know, especially 100% cotton. But one way to know for sure, if you don't buy them in the packs, is that on the lower right side of all Arches papers, they have a watermark. And that's also another way to find out which way is the top and which way is underneath. Now, the thing of it is, I understand that the top has 2 layers of sizing in it, and that the underside has only 1. So people have asked, well, does it matter if you paint, which side you paint on? Well, I have not found any difference. And the thing of it is, once you start cutting this up, this is only on the lower right hand side of this 22-inch by 30-inch paper. So how would I ever know? Unless, of course, I'm smart enough to mark it, which I never am. Most manufacturers offer a variety of papers, from thin and very smooth to extremely thick and very rough. But generally the 3 surfaces that are offered are hot press. That means it's very, very smooth. And then there's cold press, which is called not, overseas, it's called not hot press. It has not been pressed. And then rough. And basically they're pretty much what they have to say. And there's 3 weights usually. One is 90 pound, which is very, very thin. 140 pound or 300 GSM is usually what we use. And then it goes up to 300 pounds. And some people love to use 300 pound. It is extremely expensive. And they like it because they don't want to stretch things. To me, stretching paper is actually fun. So I wouldn't be investing in this 300 pound paper. So now let's take a look at the variety of brushes that are available. I'm going to let you know the whole range of brushes, knowing that we are just going to start with some very simple entry-level brushes, but I have to tell you, I absolutely love these brushes. These are Dick Blick brushes, and they're made with golden Taklon, so they're synthetics, but they're very well made. And although when you paint with them, they do release the water fast, so you can't get these really long lines, and that's important sometimes. But for the most part, you can paint the rest of your life with these golden Taklons. The next level of brushes in terms of expense are the 50/50s. And I've come to really like these as well. They hold a little bit more water. These are 50% synthetics and 50% squirrel. Although I have to say, once I learned that it was squirrel, I just love the little squirrels in my backyard. Well, some of these have this really nice back that makes for great scraping. So this is a good brush to move up to from the golden taklons. Next in line in terms of expense are these wonderful Kolinsky brushes. Now, these are your Christmas presents. This brush I think was about $35, or maybe this one was, and this goes up to $50. They're pretty expensive, but the Kolinsky hair that comes from a weasel, not the Kolinsky sable, is a really great brush to sort of depend on. And then, and this is made by Raphael. Winsor Newton Series 7 is a very expensive brush. This is a small Series 7, and to be honest, I don't like it at all. This is a Raphael, which is also a very small brush because I've started painting some very small pieces, or small shapes. And this is another fur, Petit Gris Pure, whatever. Okay, then the next level, or the next type of brush I want to show you are these bristle brushes that Sterling Edwards sells. Now, this is crazy. I bought these in a workshop because, you know, you buy stuff at a workshop. And he kept talking about how this would soften edges, and I, of course, didn't believe him because I thought there was only one way to soften edges. Turns out he's right, and so when your paint starts drying, you can use these to just play with the edge, and it softens it very, very nicely. Also, you can spread these out a little bit and get different kinds of marks. This is a very stiff brush, and speaking of stiff brushes, I want to show you these. These are scrubbers, and these brushes you can buy specifically for scrubbing. Look at how really stiff that is, and it's also rounded. This can also damage the paper really well. So if you're interested into that, so you have to be very, very careful with these scrubbers. We're going to talk about these brushes later on in other series, not just the beginner, because you don't need them for now. But you can go get an oil painting brush that has a stiff bristle, or maybe you have one around the house, and these are very good for softening edges as well. This one maybe cost $2 US. The next type of brush I wanted to show you is this Heike brush, or Hake, depending on where you come from, and it's very soft. It holds a lot of water, and I use this to wet down large pieces of canvas. It's a nice brush to have, not terribly expensive. Then, the reason I'm showing you these are fairly large flat brushes, but the important part about these brushes is how wide, how many bristles is in the belly of the brush. They should all come to a point, but the belly of the brush is what helps determine how much water is in that bristle. This one is very thin, and so if I want a very thin application, I'll go for this one. Now, as far as the handle is concerned, what I really like about these plastic handles is the paint never comes off. Now, if that's not a problem for you, you don't care about it, then wood handles are just fine. And one other thing I wanted to show you are these brushes, which have absolutely no use to me whatsoever. They were extremely expensive, and I just love the way they look. I bought these sort of as a souvenir when I was traveling, and that's what I do. I buy art supplies as my souvenirs, so I remember where I was when I bought these. And that is sort of an overview of the brushes. Remember, we're only going to use the golden Taklons for this series of classes, and only one flat and a round. And so over the 15 years, I guess, that I've been teaching, since I am a supply junkie, I've bought several palettes. And I wanted to show them to you. This one looks really cool. It's got a lot of wells in it, but these wells are really large, and some watercolor teachers will tell you you need to fill the whole well. I disagree with that completely. I think just filling it somewhat and letting them dry is fine, because it gives you room to put in fresh tube paint if you decide you need that. On all your palettes, you will want to write down what the pigment is, and you can do that with a permanent marker. If you change what the palette is, what the pigment is, you can always erase this with alcohol. Just totally cool. And then I usually arrange mine in a specific order. Sometimes I arrange them in a rainbow type of thing with granulating colors on one side. I do have a specific recommendation for you guys, which I have found over the years really works, and I'll show that to you in a minute. Another one of these palettes was developed by a guy named Stephen Quiller. That's Quiller. Stephen Quiller is a color theorist and very thorough. And if you are more of an advanced student and you're interested in color, I would look up his books, and I'll put that in the notes for tonight. The reason I have the colors on here is because I cannot really see and understand what these dark colors here are, you see. So when I use this palette, I keep this as a reference. I really wish I liked this palette, and the reason is because this particular yellow that has been formulated in Italy, if you mix this with this particular violet, you get an absolute neutral color. And we're going to talk about that later on in this session. But he has formulated these colors to be specifically on this place in the color wheel. And we're going to talk about the color wheel a little bit more. But for some reason, I just have not gotten involved in this. The plastic that he has here, which is really important to know about, does bead up. You see? He has this in a porcelain palette. The other problem that I see with this palette is that it's so large. So it's not one that I use all the time. I will show you another one that's sort of in that same category. And this one is, let's see, it's made by Masterson. I believe that's right. Masterson, yes. Now that's not Masters like as in Hobby Lobby, but Masterson. And the thing that's different about this particular one is that the wells go down on the sides, which means that the water collects down at the bottom of the wells down here. It's a little bit smaller than the other one that I showed you. And the plastic supposedly, and the reason I bought it, and it wasn't cheap, was because then the paints didn't bead up, but they still do and always will on plastic. All right, so I do want to show you something that I use often when I'm doing really large paintings, which is what I'm doing now. And this is an egg crate that, again, you can buy at a home or cooking store. And the reason I use this is because, let's say I use a lot of this green color, I can fill this entire well with that color already pre-mixed. so I don't have to keep going back and mixing. The big problem with this, of course, is that I don't have a mixing surface, so I already have to know that these colors are going to work for me. I've already tested them on papers and so forth and so on. The next palette I want to show you is one that I use a lot, and you'll notice that I wrote on here transparent colors, and on this one I write class palette. This is the one that eventually I am hoping to guide you into this particular one. I've taught from this palette for 10 years now, and I find that if you have this palette with the colors in it, you can paint just about anything that you want. Anything. Now the transparent colors one has more colors in it, and they're all transparent, all of them. So that if I happen to want to paint a painting for the Transparent Watercolor Society, I know that all I have to do is come to these paints. We'll discuss that too. The big problem with it is, look, it's the same size as the Quiller palette, so it takes up desk space. The nice thing about it, and this is true of the class palette, they don't call it the class palette, I do, is that you have another tray in case you need it. All right, then I do want to show you one other thing. People will sell this as a palette, and it is not. The reason I say it's not is because there's really, you can put your colors in here, but there's no place to mix this. This is way too small. You would need some other surface to mix colors in. Now what I do, this is freezer paper, and I put, if I think I'm going to use a lot of greens, which I'm using on a project right now, I just cut out a piece of freezer paper and put some glue dots on the back here, just put it in, and then I know, especially with these darker colors, I can tell exactly where I'm going with those. Then, of course, this is porcelain, and what I like about this is that if I'm using limited colors, I could just put them on and mix them on the palette itself. I have plenty of mixing space, and I can easily clean this up with a spray bottle or just a sponge or whatever, and it mixes easily. Porcelain works great because it doesn't bead up. And by the way, a white plate will do. You can go to a dollar store and get a porcelain or china plate, and you've got the same benefit as you have from this. This one cost me $7. So, and it's really nice. Now, this paint has dried on here, which is great because all I have to do is wet it down and start mixing colors. And it is a wonderful, wonderful surface. This palette is not a wonderful surface. This is actually an acrylic palette, and all the paints will bead up immediately on this, and so it's very hard to see exactly what color you have, especially if it's been there for, you know, a few minutes. So let's go now to the class palette and look at it in detail. This palette also has that little extra mixing tray. I have some gold paint on here because I don't want to throw it away, although I haven't used it in years. I don't even know what's still there. But if you do feel like buying more stuff, this is called a My Yellow palette. When it closes, supposedly it closes so well that it keeps the paints all nice and wet. It isn't necessarily the truth, but let me show you how this palette is organized, and I will send you this map for the future. These are the three triads: yellow, red, and blue. I have an extra little red in here because that's a really deep red, but it is it's a cool color, meaning it's closer to blue than these colors. Cool blue. Okay. Then these colors are the warm colors, yellow, red, and blue. And I've stuck an orange in here just for my benefit. So if you were going to just do this one, it would be yellow, red, blue, yellow, red, and this is ultramarine blue. So these colors down here are all the granulating colors. And we're going to have fun with two of those, burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, which is on your palette, or on your list. And I tried to get your list as simple as I can, because when you're first starting as a beginner, it's expensive. And you may not even know if you want to do it. But this palette online should cost you about $13. And if you decide you want to fill in some of these other colors, you'll get free shipping and so forth and so on. But anyway, this is the palette that I would recommend you get once you've decided you like watercolors. Watercolors generally come in two paints. These are the paints that are on my list, my supply list. They're 5 milliliters. But then once you start painting, you will find that you can go through some of these a little bit quicker. If you don't paint all the time, believe it or not, if you get professional paints, this will last you a year. And the reason is because it is so intense with pigment. I wanted to show you, this is one of those porcelain plates that I've mentioned before. These paints have been in here for over a year. And some teachers will tell you, oh, you really need to have dry, fresh paints. Well, if you're in a real humid area, you might want to avoid molded paints. But look at how this lasts. They're just in great shape. It doesn't matter how old it is, as I said, unless it gets moldy, and then you want to probably avoid that. But look at that. Look how nice and bright these colors are. And honestly, about a year. They've been sitting there for about a year. Is that nice? Okay, so each paint is made out of pigment and a binder. And so if you want to know, which I do, what kind of pigment it is, you can often look on the tube and it'll tell you. That's true of Daniel Smith, not always on Winsor Newton, but you can go online and see what that is. If you do go online to look at it, go to a website called handprint.com. And that will give you all kinds of chemical information about all of these paints. But let's go back to what is on here. And I understand it's hard to see this, but on here it'll say that what's in here, and this will say PBR7. Now that means P stands for pigment. This is the dumbest thing. BR stands for brown, and 7 is the industry number of what that is. And then PB15 is pigment blue 15, which is a phthalo blue. And this is mixed up in gum arabic. Now, why do you want to know all that? Well, some people don't, but I do, because then I will know that Cascade green is the same as a different kind of green manufacturer, as long as I know that it has phthalocyanine green in it. So for me, I like knowing what the pigments are. Some people don't even care, and that's cool. Another way to buy pigments is in already pre-made half pans. So here's one example of it, and the manufacturer decides which paints to put in here, but once you use your paints up, you can fill it with whatever it is you desire to put in here. Some of them will provide you with a box that has half pans in them that are not filled. So you can just fill it with whatever you want. These have dried up actually. I decided to put gouache in this one to see if that would work. And it worked marginally well. This one's from Sennelier. It's pretty sophisticated. Has a lot of different kinds of paints in them. And oddly, I don't use it as often because the paints that they provided are not exactly what I like to use. So I'll drag it out occasionally. So that's that for that. Pretty cool, huh? All right. The next thing you need to know is whether or not they're transparent or they're granulating, whether they're opaque, and whether they're staining. How do you learn this? Well, you can, again, go to handprint.com, or you can test them out yourself. So this is how I do it. Again, maybe I'm crazy, but I really love doing this. Now I did a whole bunch of tests of blue. This is phthalo blue, and this open square says it's transparent. It's staining. Why do you care about that? Because that means that it's difficult to lift. You also might want to use this paint as a first layer. It doesn't granulate. That means that I can make a sky that will have no bumps in it. I also put down, does it spread in water? Yes, it's slow, but it keeps on going. And then it leaves a stain on dry, but you can lift it. And so I tested all these things. This is salt. This is a lift. Let's go to another one. This is cobalt. Cobalt is a semi-transparent paint. This you will find on the tubes or in the references. It's non-staining. That means that I can lift it anytime, and this one would probably go on top of another paint. It's medium spreading and very easy to lift. And look at how beautiful that is. But let me show you ultramarine blue. Now ultramarine blue is granulating. You can sort of see that. I want to show you another granulation. Here I put ultramarine blue in with burnt sienna, both colors you have. Isn't that just gorgeous? So you can get all these wonderful, wonderful patterns and textures with watercolor just by putting them in. Imagine how much work that would take to get it in oil or acrylic. Other things you can do with your paints is you can put an underpainting, and then on top of it you can use a stencil and put another one on top of that. Then use tissue to lift this. Look at these wonderful things that you can do with this paint. All right. One more I want to show you. This is a Grumbacher phthalo blue, totally different than the other phthalo blue. Every manufacturer has a different color, a different name. Transparent, it's staining, and non-granulating. So this would be great for skies and so forth. So by knowing the characteristics of your paints, you will know whether or not you want to use it in the sky, in the ocean. Here's Daniel Smith's cerulean blue. Now I don't know of another blue that granulates as much as this one. So I would never use that unless I were building a stormy sky, and then that might be the first one I go for. So there you have it, a comprehensive view of supplies. I hope it wasn't too crazy. And now we can get started to paint.